It all started with a trash can. Simple, right? Just one of those standard plastic bins you roll out to the curb every week. You've probably got one of your own, but no, not in my neighborhood. Here my trash can became a symbol of war, a battleground for the most ridiculous, petty conflict I've ever had the displeasure of experiencing. And the villain in this story? None other than Karen. Let me set the scene for you. I live in a suburban neighborhood, the kind with neat lawns, identical houses, and rules. Lots of rules. The HOA, Homeowners Association, has a whole list of regulations that no one really reads, but somehow everyone follows because, well, Karen is watching. And trust me, when Karen is watching, you don't want to mess around. It was a Tuesday morning, just like any other. I was about to take my trash out, minding my own business, when I heard a voice that seemed to carry the weight of 100 HOA complaints, coming from my front yard. I turned, squinting against the early sunlight, and saw her. Karen. Now I know what you're thinking. Oh no, not that Karen. But yes, that Karen, the one who knows all the rules, the one who has memorized every single fine print in the HOA bylaws, the one who reports you for the tiniest infraction, like when your grass grows a little too long or when your trash can is placed half an inch off center. And there she was, standing at the end of my driveway, hands on her hips, glaring at my trash can like it had personally insulted her. I should have known something was off. I hadn't even rolled the can to the curb yet, but Karen was standing there like she'd been waiting for this moment all week. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp like she had just caught me doing something criminal. "You need to move that trash can back onto the curb." I blinked. "It's on the curb," I said, trying to stay calm. My trash can was literally 2 feet away from where the curb started, but I could see her eyes narrowing as if that was some huge violation of the sacred HOA rules. "Not quite on the curb," Karen replied, her tone a mixture of disbelief and authority. "It's sticking out a little bit, and you know the rules, right?" I was just about to ask her which specific rule she was referring to, but then she gave me the look. You know, the look people get when they know they're about to unleash a lecture and they can't wait to see the victim squirm. "You're supposed to place your trash cans exactly on the curb," she continued, as if I was too simple to understand the concept of basic trash can placement. "If you don't follow the rules, you could get a fine. The HOA is very strict about this." The HOA, the mythical all-knowing, ever-watching HOA, I could feel the rage building up in my chest. How is it possible that someone could get this upset over a few inches of space? But Karen didn't care about logic. She didn't care about reason. To her, every tiny deviation from perfection was an act of rebellion, and she, of course, was the appointed sheriff of this neighborhood. "Look," I said, trying to keep my cool. "I'm literally just putting my trash can out like everyone else. It's fine." But Karen wasn't done. Oh no. She crossed her arms, huffing like I had just shattered her entire world with a misplaced trash can. "You just don't get it, do you?" She sighed dramatically, as if she was the only one in the world who understood the importance of rules. "If everyone keeps ignoring the guidelines, it'll be chaos. You're making the whole neighborhood look bad. What would the HOA think if they saw this?" I stared at her, mouth agape, trying to process what she had just said. What would the HOA think? Are we living in some dystopian future where our trash cans are scrutinized like they're works of art? This was insane. Absolutely insane. But of course, Karen wasn't done yet. She wasn't just going to leave it at the curb. "The whole neighborhood is watching," she added ominously, as if I had somehow been caught in the act of the most heinous crime ever committed. "You better be careful. You don't want to get fined." Now, at this point, I probably should have just said something like, "Yeah, okay, thanks for the heads up, Karen," and closed the door. But no, I wasn't in the mood for polite small talk. I was in the mood for a little sarcasm because honestly, what was she going to do? Call the HOA on me for putting a trash can 2 inches too far from the curb? I wasn't about to be intimidated. I didn't realize I was committing a felony by putting my trash can out. "Next time I'll make sure to measure it," I said, rolling my eyes. Karen's face didn't crack a smile. No, she wasn't going to play along with my sarcasm. She was on a mission, and my poor trash can was her target. "You laugh now," she said darkly, "but you won't be laughing when the HOA finds you." I shook my head. "Okay, Karen, I'll make sure to realign my trash can for the greater good of the neighborhood. Thanks for the advice." And just like that, she turned and marched off, but not without one final jab. "This neighborhood has standards. Don't ruin it for the rest of us." I stood there watching her disappear behind her perfectly manicured hedge. My brain was still trying to process what had just happened. Did that woman just lecture me about my trash can placement? I didn't even know how to respond. It was like a fever dream, but despite the absurdity of it all, something in me snapped. I wasn't going to let this slide. I grabbed the trash can, moved it a few inches to the left, just to be extra sure it was perfectly aligned with the curb, and went back inside. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Karen had opened a door, and now I was just waiting for the next ridiculous encounter. And I had a feeling it wouldn't be long before it happened. Little did I know, that tiny, ridiculous moment was the beginning of something much bigger, a battle of wills between me and Karen that would escalate in ways I could never have predicted. A battle that would end in concrete. But that's a story for another time. For now, I just had to survive the HOA and Karen's obsessive rule-following tendencies. And if I was lucky, I'd make it out without a fine. After the first trash can incident with Karen, I thought maybe that would be it. Maybe she'd get over it and I could go back to living my life in peace. How naive I was. I'd underestimated the level of pettiness that some people can reach when they're armed with a sense of self-importance and an HOA handbook. For the next few days, I thought I was safe. I moved my trash can to the curb like a law-abiding citizen, measuring it with precision. I even made sure it was perfectly straight, like it had to be for an official photo shoot. The neighborhood was peaceful, and I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I had dodged a bullet. But then, on Thursday, everything changed. I woke up early that morning, still half asleep, dragging myself to the kitchen for some coffee. I was just about to take a sip when I noticed something strange. A noise, a scraping sound. I glanced out the window, expecting to see the usual morning dew or maybe a dog running around. But no. There she was, Karen, standing at the end of my driveway with her hands on her hips again. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. But no. She was there glaring at my trash can like it had personally offended her. I rubbed my eyes, convinced I was still dreaming. What was she doing? I leaned closer to the window to get a better look. Sure enough, she was pushing my trash can, tipping it over with one swift motion. I couldn't believe it. My heart skipped a beat. She'd done it. She had actually knocked over my trash can. Again. Unbelievable, I muttered under my breath, slamming the mug down on the counter. This time, there was no polite conversation. No passive-aggressive comments about curbs or HOA rules. Karen was straight up vandalizing my trash can. As the lid clattered to the ground, I had to take a moment to process what had just happened. I was now living in a world where Karen, my neighbor, had officially declared war on my trash can. This was a level of petty I didn't think was even possible. I stormed outside, not caring that I was still wearing my pajamas. It was 7 a.m., and Karen was about to see how far I was willing to go to protect my trash can. When I reached the end of my driveway, Karen saw me and immediately gave me that smug look. The kind of look you get when you've already won in your mind. I took a deep breath to keep myself from losing my cool. Karen, what the hell do you think you're doing? I demanded, my voice a mix of frustration and disbelief. Oh, I was just making sure your trash can was in compliance with the rules, she said, as if this was some sort of community service she was providing. In compliance with the rules? I echoed, throwing my hands up in the air. It was perfectly fine on the curb, and you just, knock it over because it was 2 inches too far to the right. Karen shrugged, like she didn't even care that I was furious. It's about the standards, you see. If everyone starts leaving their trash cans like this, the whole neighborhood will fall apart. It's about respecting the HOA, and you clearly don't care. I gaped at her. Was she serious? The whole neighborhood will fall apart, I repeated, trying to make sense of this bizarre situation. Karen, it's a trash can, not a national crisis. But Karen didn't want to hear that. She wasn't interested in logic. She wasn't interested in anything except being the self-appointed enforcer of HOA laws. You just don't get it, do you? She said, shaking her head. The HOA doesn't take kindly to this sort of behavior. You're lucky I'm being so understanding about it. But you should know I'm giving you a warning. Keep this up, and I'll have no choice but to report it. Report it, report it? I had no words. I had spent the last 2 weeks making sure I followed every rule, and yet here she was, standing in front of me like I was some criminal. All because my trash can was a couple of inches off-center. I clenched my fists, trying to keep it together. Fine, I snapped. Go ahead and report me, let's see what happens. Karen smiled a little too smugly for my taste. You'll see, she said, turning to walk back down the driveway. You'll see. I stood there, seething. What was I supposed to do? I had two choices: let her keep knocking over my trash can or do something about it. And that's when it hit me. I needed to take action, but it couldn't be a normal, everyday action. Oh no. This needed to be something that would get Karen's attention and hopefully make her regret ever messing with me in the first place. The next few days passed in a blur of frustration. Every time I went to roll my trash can out, I had to double-check that it was positioned just so, perfectly aligned with the curb. But that still didn't stop Karen. No, every time she saw my trash can out, she found some reason to knock it over. One morning, she even went as far as to kick it, like it was some kind of game to her. And every time I let it slide, I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me angry. I wasn't going to stoop to her level. But internally, I was furious. My patience was wearing thin. Then came the fateful day. It was a Friday morning, and I was getting ready for work when I heard that unmistakable sound. A loud crash, followed by the familiar clattering of my trash can being knocked over. I walked outside, and there she was once again, Karen, standing there, her arms crossed, looking pleased with herself. I was done trying to be civil, done letting her walk all over me. I stared at her. "You're really not going to stop, are you?" "No," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "Because it's my job to make sure this neighborhood stays in compliance with the HOA, and you're clearly not doing your part." I clenched my jaw. "You know what, Karen? I think it's time I did something about this." Her smug smile faltered for a split second, but then she crossed her arms again, like she was ready for whatever nonsense I was about to say. "Fine," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You want to keep messing with my trash can? Then let's see how you like it when I start getting creative." Karen raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" I didn't answer. I turned and walked back into the house, my mind already racing. I had a plan, and it was going to be the kind of plan that would make Karen regret ever thinking she could mess with me. That was it. This wasn't about a trash can anymore. This was about sending a message that Karen would never forget. I grabbed my phone and made a call. This was only the beginning. I spent the next few hours packing around my living room, thinking. The coffee I had earlier wasn't working anymore. The adrenaline was kicking in now, and the only thing I could focus on was Karen and her ridiculous petty war on my trash can. It wasn't just about a trash can anymore. No, this had become personal. Karen had taken something that was supposed to be mundane, my weekly garbage, and turned it into a battlefield. She had no idea what kind of storm she was about to stir up. I knew I needed to do something dramatic, something that would finally get her to back off. But what? I needed an idea, a plan that would make Karen stop in her tracks. I mean, this wasn't just about proving a point anymore. It was about taking control. It was about making Karen realize that messing with me came at a cost. I wanted her to look at my trash can and know that it was not something she could easily knock over. That's when it hit me. I don't know why it took me this long to come up with the idea, but once it clicked, I almost laughed out loud. It was perfect. It was insane, but perfect. The plan: fill the trash can with concrete. Now I know what you're thinking. Concrete? Yes, concrete. Hear me out. If Karen thought she could keep knocking over my trash can like some kind of playground bully, I was going to make it so she couldn't. Imagine Karen standing there, trying to tip over a trash can that had been filled with solid concrete. The thought alone brought a twisted grin to my face. I couldn't wait to see the look on her face when she realized that my trash can wasn't just some flimsy plastic container. It was a fortress of impenetrable, heavy, rock-solid concrete. So without wasting any more time, I got to work. I grabbed my keys and headed straight for Home Depot. The world outside looked like any other suburban Saturday, but I was on a mission now. Nothing was going to stop me from executing my plan. Not the weather, not Karen, and certainly not logic. When I walked into the store, I made a beeline for the building supplies aisle. I felt like a man on a mission, like I was preparing for battle. It was absurd, but in the best way possible. I grabbed a couple of bags of concrete mix, knowing I was going to need more than one. I mean, I wasn't just going to pour a little concrete in the bottom and call it a day. Oh no, I needed enough to fill the entire trash can. As I loaded the concrete bags into my cart, I realized just how ridiculous this whole situation had gotten. Here I was, buying bags of concrete to fill a trash can, all because one neighbor had decided to make it her life's mission to knock it over every time she could. But honestly, I didn't care. At this point, I was enjoying the absurdity. I also picked up a few other supplies: water, a mixing stick, and some plastic sheeting to protect my driveway from the mess. I wasn't about to destroy my front yard for the sake of some petty revenge. That would just be an extra headache I didn't need. Back at home, I opened the garage and surveyed the scene. The trash can sat there, taunting me. It looked so innocent, just sitting there, waiting for Karen to come along and ruin my day again. I glared at it, already picturing how it would look once it was filled with concrete. It would be a thing of beauty. I set up a workstation in the driveway. I laid down the plastic sheeting first to protect my driveway from the inevitable concrete spills. Then, I set the trash can in the middle of the yard, just a little to the left of where it usually sat. I had to make sure I wasn't interfering with the sidewalk, of course. It had to be strategically placed, even if Karen didn't appreciate my precision. The first bag of concrete was heavier than I expected. I tore open the top and began mixing the dry concrete with water, following the instructions carefully. The smell of the wet cement hit me, and for a moment I wondered if I was making a huge mistake. Shouldn't I just buy a new trash can? Shouldn't I just let it go? But then I remembered Karen. I remembered how she had knocked over my trash can with that smug, self-righteous look on her face. I remembered how she threatened to report me to the HOA as though she were the queen of the neighborhood. No, this wasn't a mistake. This was genius. And frankly, it felt good. It felt right. The concrete mix started to take shape. It was thickening fast, and I knew I didn't have much time before it would set. I grabbed the second bag of concrete and poured it in, mixing as I went. It was hard work, but I was so focused that I barely noticed the sweat dripping down my forehead. By the time I'd finished, I had a massive, solid block of concrete inside the trash can. I stood back and admired my handiwork. It looked ridiculous, it looked absurd, and most importantly, it looked unmovable. I stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. My trash can was now a weapon of mass inconvenience. There was no way Karen could knock it over now. I almost wanted to film her reaction, but that would have been too much. Besides, I was going to enjoy this without the need for an audience. The payback would be enough. As the concrete began to harden, I cleaned up the mess I had made in the driveway and went inside to grab a shower. I knew it would take a few hours for the concrete to set properly, but that gave me time to rest and mentally prepare for what was coming next. I wasn't going to warn Karen. No, I was going to let her figure it out herself. She was going to show up in a few days, just like always, and try to knock over my trash can. And when she did, she'd find herself staring at a solid block of concrete that wouldn't budge an inch. That night, I could barely sleep. I kept imagining Karen's face when she saw what I had done. I had this vision of her running up to the trash can with all her usual arrogance, ready to knock it over, only to find that it wouldn't even wobble. I could already hear the protests, the confusion, the outrage. It was going to be glorious. The next morning, I couldn't help but grin as I walked past the trash can. The concrete was now fully set. The can was heavy, sturdy, and completely unmoving. I gave it a gentle push. Nothing, it didn't budge an inch. The war had begun, and I had just raised the stakes. Now it was only a matter of time before Karen came along. And when she did, she was in for the shock of her life. The morning felt different. It was like the calm before the storm, and I could feel the energy building up. The trash can was standing proudly at the end of my driveway, a solid block of concrete in disguise. The world outside looked like any other normal Tuesday, but I knew today was the day. Today, Karen was going to find out that things were different. I couldn't help but chuckle to myself as I took my coffee to the front porch. Karen had no idea what was coming. She probably thought that I was just some lazy guy who couldn't follow simple HOA rules. Well, she was about to learn that I was far more creative and petty than she ever imagined. I sat there sipping my coffee and pretending to be casual, though my heart was pounding in my chest. Every car that passed by made me jump a little. Was it Karen? Was she already on her way? I glanced down at my trash can, standing tall and immovable, and grinned. Then around 9:30 a.m. I saw her. I spotted her walking down the street, hands on her hips, her usual "I'm about to ruin someone's day" posture. She was looking straight ahead, but then she saw it. The look on her face was priceless. It was like her brain had to process the sight of the trash can for a few seconds before it registered. She stopped mid-step, her eyes narrowing as she took in the sight of my concrete-filled trash can. It was like watching a deer in headlights, except this deer was about to have a meltdown. She took a few cautious steps toward the can, like she was investigating a crime scene. I could hear her muttering under her breath from where I sat. "What the hell is this?" she said aloud, bending down and poking the side of the can like it might explode. She looked around, almost as if expecting someone to jump out and tell her it was a prank. I tried to hold back my grin, but it was hard. I leaned back in my chair, taking another sip of coffee, watching the show unfold. Karen was still inspecting the trash can, pushing it, pulling at the lid, looking for any way to make it budge. I don't know if she thought she could push the concrete out of the can, or if she was just trying to comprehend what kind of witchcraft I had performed. Either way, I knew it wasn't going to work. She stepped back, scratching her head. "What the hell is this?" she muttered again, her voice tinged with frustration. She looked up at me then, and for the first time I saw a crack in her usual confidence. She wasn't smug anymore. She was confused, and that was exactly what I wanted. I leaned forward in my chair and gave her a little wave. "Hey, Karen," I called out casually, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Is there a problem?" Her eyes snapped to mine, and for a second she looked like she was trying to hold herself together. "What did you do?" she asked, her tone a mix of shock and fury. I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean, just following the rules, right?" I said, gesturing to the trash can. "It's on the curb just like it's supposed to be." She was seething now, hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You filled it with concrete," she spat, as if it was the most heinous crime imaginable. I shrugged. "Yeah, I did. Thought it'd be a good way to keep it in place. Don't want it falling over again, you know." She was practically sputtering at this point, her face turning red with a mix of anger and disbelief. You can't just do that, that's not allowed. You can't just fill a trash can with concrete like it's some decoration." I bit back a laugh. "Oh, but I can. In fact, I checked the HOA guidelines. Nothing in there about concrete-filled trash cans. I'm pretty sure I'm in the clear." Karen stared at me like I had just insulted her entire existence. "You're going to pay for this," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "I'm going to report you. I'm going to have this entire neighborhood report you. You're breaking every rule. This is ridiculous." At this point, I was genuinely enjoying myself. I hadn't felt this in control of a situation in a long time. I leaned back in my chair again, savoring the moment. "Go ahead, Karen," I said, my voice calm and almost friendly. "Report me. I'm sure the HOA will be real concerned about a concrete trash can." I grinned. "Maybe they'll even give me a medal for creative thinking." Karen's face was purple now. She was shaking with rage, but there was nothing she could do. She tried pushing the can again, and this time she was even more aggressive. She put her shoulder into it, grunting as she tried to shove it, but the trash can didn't budge. The concrete was heavy, immovable. It was like trying to push over a stone wall. At this point, I couldn't help myself. I stood up and walked down my driveway toward her, just enjoying the chaos. "Need help, Karen?" I called out, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're not having any luck there. Want me to show you how it works?" She spun around, eyes blazing. "This is insane. You can't just—" But I cut her off. "Well, I did, and now you have to deal with it." Karen didn't know what to do next. She was completely defeated. She'd run out of things to say, run out of ways to manipulate the situation, and it felt good. She took a step back, still glaring at me, and for a moment I thought she might explode. But then, just as quickly as her anger had flared up, it deflated. She huffed in frustration, her shoulders slumping. "You're a real piece of work, you know that?" she said through clenched teeth. I smiled. "I know, but hey, at least I'm not the one knocking over trash cans like some kind of toddler throwing a tantrum." She gave me one last look of pure contempt and turned on her heel, marching back down the street toward her house. The whole time, she kept muttering to herself about how unfair it was, how I was ruining the neighborhood with my garbage can, but I couldn't care less. I watched her go, my heart still racing with excitement. I had won. I had finally outsmarted Karen at her own game, and I had done it in the most ridiculous way possible. But the best part? Karen couldn't do a damn thing about it. The concrete trash can was a thing of beauty, unyielding, unmovable, and utterly hilarious. As I stood there watching her disappear around the corner, I felt a wave of satisfaction wash over me. The battle was over, and I had come out on top. I turned around and went back inside, feeling like I had just won some epic victory. I didn't need any fancy trophies or applause. All I needed was the knowledge that Karen had just been outsmarted by a trash can filled with concrete. And that, my friends, was worth every bit of effort. It had only been a few days since Karen's failed attempt to knock over my concrete-filled trash can, and things were quieter than usual. I was starting to think I had finally won. The trash can stood tall, unmoving, like a silent victory on the curb. Every time I walked past it, I couldn't help but grin. It was like a trophy that no one could touch. Even the neighbor kids had stopped making jokes about it. I was living the dream. But of course, things can't be easy for too long. It was just my luck that Karen wasn't the type to quit so easily. No, she had a backup plan, and I was about to find out what it was. It started on a Monday morning when I heard the familiar sound of her heels clicking against the pavement. I was in the kitchen, making coffee, when I glanced out the window and saw her walking up to my house. I groaned inwardly. Was she really coming over to talk about my trash can again? Didn't she have better things to do? But no, she was determined to make my life miserable. I watched as she approached my driveway with that same intense, self-righteous look she always had. But this time, something was different. She wasn't alone. No, Karen had brought reinforcements. I squinted, trying to make out who the two people walking with her were. They didn't look familiar, but they certainly looked important. One of them was wearing a suit, carrying a clipboard, and the other was holding what looked like a stack of official-looking papers. Oh, great. This was definitely not going to be good. Karen saw me through the window and waved, her smug expression not even trying to hide how pleased she was with herself. It was like she knew something I didn't, and that only made my stomach churn. I had a bad feeling about this. I set my coffee mug down and went outside, trying to stay calm. As I approached the front yard, Karen was already talking to the two people, who I now realized were from the HOA. "Good morning," Karen called out cheerfully as I stepped onto the driveway. "I'm so glad you could make it." I gave her a tight smile. "Morning, Karen, what's going on here?" "Oh, just a little matter I wanted to clear up," Karen said, looking like she was trying to suppress a grin. "You see, your trash can is causing a problem, and I've brought the HOA in to sort it out." I glanced at the two HOA representatives. One of them, a tall, serious-looking guy, was eyeing the concrete trash can like it was some kind of alien artifact. The other, a woman in her 50s with thick glasses, was writing something down on her clipboard. I already knew what was coming next. I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "Look, I already told you, Karen, it's perfectly fine. There's nothing in the HOA rules about concrete-filled trash cans." Karen's smile widened. "Ah, but there's something about modifying community property. The trash can isn't just for your personal use anymore. It's part of the neighborhood. And that," she said, pointing at the concrete, "is a violation of the HOA guidelines." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really? Since when does a trash can become community property?" The tall guy with the clipboard spoke up, his voice polite but firm. "Actually, we're here because a modification of any kind that alters the common areas or the aesthetics of the neighborhood must be approved by the HOA first." I stared at him, not quite believing what I was hearing. "Are you serious right now? We're talking about a trash can. A trash can," I repeated, as if saying it a second time would make it sound less ridiculous. The woman in glasses looked up from her clipboard. "Yes, but the placement of your trash can and the modifications to it affect the neighborhood aesthetic standards. The concrete is a structural change, and that requires approval from the HOA board." I felt my patience starting to wear thin. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered. I glanced over at Karen, who was looking far too pleased with herself. This was her doing, wasn't it? I could see it in her face. She was enjoying every second of this. "This is absurd," I said, trying to stay calm. "There's nothing in the rules that says I can't fill my own trash can with concrete. And if you're really trying to tell me that I'm breaking some HOA rule because I made my trash can immovable, then that's a serious problem." The HOA guy shifted his weight but didn't back down. "Well, the HOA has received multiple complaints about this, and after a thorough review of the guidelines, we have to inform you that modifications like this require immediate removal." I laughed, mostly out of disbelief. "Remove it? You want me to remove the concrete?" Karen nodded solemnly. "Yes. If you don't comply, the HOA will issue a fine, and if that isn't resolved, we may have to take further action." I glanced from Karen to the HOA reps, trying to figure out how I'd gotten tangled up in this mess. "You know," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm, "I thought HOA fines were for things like dead lawns, not trash cans. I mean, is this really what you're spending your time on?" But Karen wasn't backing down. The rules are the rules, she said, her voice practically oozing with satisfaction. If you want to live in this neighborhood, you have to follow them, and if you don't, the HOA will enforce those rules. There's nothing you can do about it. I felt my blood start to boil. Karen was pushing every button I had, and now she had the HOA backing her up. It was one thing for her to make my life miserable, but now she had brought the full weight of the neighborhood's rules down on me. I had no idea how far she was willing to take this, but I knew I wasn't going to back down without a fight. Fine, I said, my voice low and dangerous. You want to play by the rules? Let's play by the rules. The HOA guy and Karen exchanged a look, clearly surprised by my sudden calm. I could feel the tension in the air as I took a deep breath and stepped forward, standing a little taller. Here, what we'll do, I'll leave the trash can where it is. I'm not moving it. But if the HOA is so concerned about modifications, then I want to see the official guidelines. I want to see the paperwork that says exactly how a trash can should be placed, and I want it in writing. Karen opened her mouth to argue, but I held up my hand. You've made your case. Now I'm making mine. You want to fine me? Fine me. But I want to see the rules. I'll fight this. The HOA guy looked at the woman beside him, who was now furiously writing things down on her clipboard. They exchanged a glance, but I could tell they didn't want to escalate this. They knew the rules were on my side. After a few tense moments, the tall HOA rep spoke again. Okay, we'll send you the documents, but just so you know, you're still in violation of community standards. I smiled sweetly. I'll look forward to seeing that in writing. With that, Karen and the HOA reps turned and walked back down my driveway, their defeat hanging in the air. I watched them go, a sense of victory filling me. This wasn't over. I wasn't going to let Karen or anyone tell me how to live in my own neighborhood. If she wanted to fight over a trash can, then we were going to fight. And this time I was ready. I turned around and walked back inside, feeling like I had just won a small but satisfying victory. Karen might have thought she'd won the battle, but I had the paperwork and I had the last word. And in the end, that was all that mattered. It had been a few days since the HOA drama. I had waited for the paperwork, but so far nothing. I was starting to wonder if Karen was going to let it go, or if she was just waiting to strike again with some new, ridiculous complaint. I'd gone over the guidelines for the neighborhood in my spare time, just in case she really did try to push me into a corner. And honestly, the more I read, the more I realized how vague and absurd the rules were. There was nothing about trash cans. Not a single word about whether or not you could fill one with concrete. And that was about to be my secret weapon. I had one thing in mind. I wasn't going to let Karen win. Not now. Not after everything she'd put me through. I wasn't going to roll over and let her push me around. No. I was going to make sure that this little trash can incident ended with Karen getting exactly what she deserved. But of course, she wasn't done yet. It was a Friday morning when the next chapter of this saga began. I was getting ready for work, standing in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing my teeth, when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps outside. I paused, spit out the toothpaste, and hurried to the window. There she was, Karen. And this time, she wasn't alone. I squinted. There was someone else with her, standing at the edge of my driveway, holding what looked like a piece of paper. I couldn't believe it. Did she really think she could just show up here with more complaints and expect me to back down? The worst part? She was holding a clipboard. I had a feeling this was going to be something official, and that always meant trouble. I threw on my shoes and rushed outside before she could knock again. This had gone far enough, and I wasn't going to let her think she had any power over me. As I stepped onto the driveway, I saw her smile, the kind of smile that said she thought she had won. But I wasn't going to let her see me sweat. "Good morning," she said, overly sweet, as though we were having a casual chat and not engaged in a full-blown battle over trash cans. I crossed my arms. "What's going on, Karen?" "Oh, just a little update from the HOA," she said, her voice practically oozing with satisfaction. "I've brought the formal complaint to the board. They've reviewed it, and they've decided that your trash can has to be moved. It's causing a nuisance to the neighborhood." I blinked. A nuisance, a nuisance. My trash can is causing a nuisance. Karen nodded, holding up the paper. "Yes, according to the rules, your trash can is an eyesore. It's filled with concrete, and that's considered improper modification. The HOA is issuing a fine unless you remove it by the end of the week." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. First of all, you can't just decide that something's a nuisance. There's no rule about concrete trash cans in the guidelines. But Karen wasn't having it. The HOA disagrees, and they're demanding action. You have to take the trash can down or else you'll face the fine. She handed me the paper, and I took it from her, glancing over it. Sure enough, there was some official-looking document with the HOA logo at the top. But as I skimmed the text, I realized something. It wasn't really official. The paper was written in vague terms, no specifics about why my trash can was considered a violation, just a generic threat about modifying property. No mention of concrete. No mention of the trash can being on the curb. And definitely no mention of the fact that the trash can had never been an issue until Karen decided it needed to be one. I looked up from the paper, meeting Karen's smug gaze. "Nice try, Karen," I said, the words practically dripping with sarcasm. "But this is nothing more than a poorly written letter. You can't fine me for something that doesn't break any actual rules." She faltered for a second but quickly recovered. "You think you're smarter than the HOA, huh? Well, I have backup from the board. They're going to make sure you follow the rules whether you like it or not." I smiled a little, keeping my tone sweet. "Is that so? Well, I'd like to see your backup in writing, because I don't see anything that says my trash can is a violation. In fact, I've read the entire HOA guideline book, and there's nothing about concrete trash cans in there." Karen's smile dropped, her face turning slightly red. "You're just trying to get out of it. The HOA has spoken, and you're going to move the trash can." I held my ground. "No, Karen, you are going to get the HOA to send me something official, and when I get that, we'll talk." There was a long, awkward silence. Karen didn't know what to say. She just stood there, fuming, as her backup looked at each other uncomfortably. Finally, she spat out, "I'll be back. You'll regret this." She turned on her heel and walked off, but not without a final look back. "You'll see, the HOA always gets its way." I watched them leave, but the excitement bubbling in my chest told me I'd just won the first round of this ridiculous back and forth. Karen was pissed, and that was the best part. Now I had to do something to make sure she really understood how outmatched she was. I went back inside, my mind racing. Karen wasn't going to win this. I was going to turn this whole situation around. She tried to turn my trash can into a weapon against me, but now it was time to use the system against her. I immediately pulled out my phone and started drafting an email to the HOA. I had a plan. A few hours later, I hit send on my email. It was polite but firm, requesting all of the official documentation regarding the HOA's guidelines on modifications to property. I was careful to make sure I didn't sound like I was trying to start a fight. I just wanted the facts. And if they didn't have any facts, well, that would be an issue. I didn't hear anything for a while. The rest of the day passed in a blur of normal activities. But by the evening, my phone buzzed. It was an email from the HOA. I opened it, reading carefully. "Dear, thank you for your inquiry. Upon review, we do not have any specific rule or guideline that addresses modifications to personal trash cans. After further consultation, we confirm that the modification you have made is not currently in violation of any HOA regulations. We apologize for any confusion this may have caused. Please feel free to contact us if you have any further questions. Sincerely, the HOA Committee." I sat back, stunned for a second. Wait, what? They were backing me up. I couldn't believe it. Karen had brought the HOA down on me, and now the HOA was admitting they didn't even have a real rule to justify her complaint. I immediately shot off a reply to Karen. "Just wanted to let you know, I've received confirmation from the HOA that my concrete trash can is not in violation of any rules. I'll be keeping it right where it is. Thanks for your concern." I hit send, and then I leaned back in my chair, letting out a long breath. I had done it. Karen had been outsmarted. The HOA was on my side, and Karen was going to look like a fool. As the email went through, I could almost hear the sound of Karen's temper bubbling up from here. It felt amazing. And as I waited for her inevitable reply, I couldn't help but smile. Because now the tables had turned, and I was the one who had won. The trash can was mine, and Karen, well, she had just met her match. It was a few days later when I got the final piece of the puzzle. Karen hadn't shown up, and I hadn't heard from her in a while. It felt almost too quiet. I kept waiting for her to come up with some new crazy tactic to get back at me, but for the first time in weeks, I found myself wondering if I was finally rid of her. But of course I knew better. This wasn't over, not yet. The email I'd sent to Karen letting her know that the HOA had backed me up. That had probably just made her even more determined to make my life miserable. I could almost picture her at home, packing back and forth, trying to figure out a way to one-up me. Karen was relentless, and I had no illusions about that. But I also knew I had the upper hand now. She might have had the HOA on her side at first, but now the tables had turned. I wasn't about to let her win this time. That's when I got the call. It was late afternoon, and I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone when my phone rang. The number wasn't familiar, but something about it made me uneasy. I didn't recognize the area code, but I picked up anyway. Hello? The voice on the other end was almost too polite, like someone who had practiced how to be professional and neutral. Hello, is this my name? This is him, I said cautiously, wondering who it could be. My name is Karen, and I'm with the HOA. I'm calling regarding the trash can issue. She didn't sound as smug as usual, but her voice was still sharp and cold. A chill ran down my spine. What now? I muttered under my breath. Listen, there's been a review of your case, and we've decided that. Wait a minute, I interrupted, a smile creeping onto my face. Didn't you already decide? The HOA already sent me an email confirming that my concrete trash can is perfectly fine. There was a pause. Yes, but we've received additional complaints from neighbors, and the board feels that the situation needs to be handled more formally. I rolled my eyes. What complaints? I'm not violating any rules. If Karen wants to complain, she can keep wasting her time, but I'm done. The HOA already ruled. End of story. Well, that's not exactly how it works. Karen's tone shifted, becoming more forceful. We are asking you to attend a hearing with the HOA board to formally address this issue. A hearing? My brain froze for a second. What, a hearing for a trash can? I had to control my temper. Karen, this is getting ridiculous. I've already been through this. You've been told that the trash can is fine. Now you're dragging me into some kind of hearing over a trash can? I don't have time for this. I understand this may be frustrating, Karen said, her voice still icy but laced with a tone that suggested she felt she had the upper hand. But you don't have a choice. If you don't attend the hearing, there will be consequences. I took a deep breath. Fine, I'll show up, but make it clear to the board that I'm not moving my trash can, I'm not removing the concrete, and I'm not apologizing for it. There was a long silence. Understood, the hearing will be held next week. We expect you to be there. I hung up the phone without another word, my mind racing. A hearing? This was beyond absurd. But Karen had gone and done it. She was dragging me back into this nightmare. If I wanted to keep my concrete trash can and keep Karen from winning, I was going to have to fight this out in front of the HOA board. I wasn't sure if I was angry or just exhausted, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to lose this. Not now. Not after everything I'd already been through. The day of the hearing came, and I had spent the past week preparing. I wasn't about to walk into that meeting unprepared. I had all the documents I needed. The HOA email confirming the trash can's status, a printout of the neighborhood guidelines that clearly didn't mention anything about modifying trash cans, and a few notes to keep me on track in case things got heated. I wasn't just going to show up and let Karen have her way. This time, I was going to make sure the HOA knew exactly how ridiculous this whole thing was. The hearing was scheduled for 6 p.m. in the community center, and I showed up a little early. The room was stuffy and dimly lit, with folding chairs lined up in neat rows. A long table at the front was occupied by the HOA board members, all wearing serious expressions. They looked like they were about to conduct a major trial, and all I could think was, for a trash can. I sat down in the back row, and after a few minutes, Karen walked in, holding her clipboard like it was her weapon of choice. She shot me a smug glance and sat down at the front of the room, waiting for her turn to speak. The HOA president, a guy named Greg, stood up and called the meeting to order. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're here to discuss the modification of property at my address, specifically the concrete-filled trash can. I wanted to roll my eyes, but I kept my composure. Greg continued, We've heard from both the homeowner and the complainant, and now we will open the floor for statements. Karen, would you like to begin? Of course, she was practically dying to speak. Karen stood up, looking very pleased with herself. Thank you, Mr. Gregg, she said, glancing at me with a smug smile. I'm here today because this concrete trash can is a clear violation of our community standards. It's a visual disturbance, and it disrupts the uniformity of our neighborhood. I have multiple complaints from neighbors who are concerned about how this is affecting property values. The modification is not only an eyesore, but it also creates an unsafe environment for children and animals. I sat back, rolling my eyes. This was what she was presenting, an unsafe environment. She was seriously grasping at straws. Greg nodded and turned to me. Would you like to respond, my name? I stood up slowly, keeping my cool. Thank you, Greg. First, let me clarify that there is no HOA guideline that says I can't modify my trash can. I've gone over the entire document, and there's nothing in it about concrete-filled trash cans. The rules simply say that trash cans should be on the curb, which, as you can see, mine is. I paused, letting that sink in for a moment. Second, I don't think anyone can make the case that my trash can is dangerous in any way. It's a concrete trash can. It's heavier, yes, but it's not a hazard. If anything, it's the most secure trash can in this neighborhood. I glanced at Karen and saw her scowl. I have received confirmation from the HOA that this modification doesn't violate any official rules. I've done everything by the book, and I'm not moving my trash can. I took a deep breath and added, and honestly, I'm tired of being dragged into these pointless meetings. This is my home. I've followed the rules, and I'm not going to let one person's obsession with rules take that away from me. I sat back down, feeling a surge of satisfaction. Karen opened her mouth to respond, but Greg raised his hand. Thank you, my name. I think we have heard enough. The board deliberated for a few moments, but it wasn't long before Greg stood again. After reviewing the guidelines and taking both sides into consideration, the board has decided that no violation has occurred. The trash can will remain where it is, and no fines will be issued. I couldn't help but grin. The board had made their decision, and it was in my favor. I turned to Karen, who was sitting there, speechless. Looks like I won, I said, my voice low but sweet. Karen didn't say a word. She just stood up, her face betrayed with anger, and stormed out of the room. The board members exchanged looks, clearly uncomfortable. Greg gave me a nod. Thank you for your time, my name. You're free to go. As I left the building, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The fight was finally over. Karen had been outsmarted, and I had stood my ground. I wasn't just the guy with the concrete trash can anymore. I was the guy who'd taken on the HOA and won. And that, my friends, felt better than any victory I could have imagined.